to believe in or not. It's an existing staple of our civil liberties. The only duality of the matter is whether you support free speech or not. It's very different. Anyway, his next point. I have no doubt that you love people coming up to you in town and trying to confront you, as this is the sole purpose of you being there. End quote. My personal feelings on the idea of being confronted, as you put it, are irrelevant. Besides what is now the second assumption you've made about me, you're wrong again here. My sole purpose, as it were, as I stated to the media and in my videos and to anyone who asks me on the street, is, in regards to the megaphone, to plant the seeds of critical thinking in people's minds so they start to look around and start questioning the system we live in. And in regards to the free hugs, it's to help brighten up people's day. Where in those two motivations lies the pursuit of wanting people to confront me and taking great pleasure in those confrontations? This is what makes this second assumption fallacious as well. If you've watched any of my videos or heard any of my response to hecklers, then my motivation when it comes to confrontations is to diffuse them, to disarm those who are trying to be combative towards me, so we can just talk like decent human beings and come to a mutual and amicable understanding. And this includes my communications with the police when they approach me. On to his next point, quote, you know full well that standing in the middle of a high street on a Saturday afternoon will attract attention, the upshot of which you record and place on YouTube. You need the confrontation to be able to fulfill your purpose. Okay, of course I'm aware that standing in the middle of a high street with a megaphone will attract attention. However, is that evidence of my sole purpose, as you put it, or is it merely consequential? This is your third assumption about me. This is why buskers choose a high street. This is why leaflet distributors, or chuggers, as I've heard them referred to, choose a high street. This is why religious preachers choose a high street. But because they choose that particular location, do they all inherently crave attention and confrontation? I don't think so. High streets have what is called a high footfall, meaning they have the highest volume of people passing through. Now, as for the upshot of the attention I receive, I do grant you that I record what I say on the megaphone, and others have recorded me. However, the only stuff up on YouTube from me thus far is the police encounters, which, if you will notice, are their failed attempts at trying to gain authority and trying to suppress the exercising of freedom of speech, which, by the way, you say you support, and yet you are attempting to demonize my efforts to publicize those efforts to suppress it. Now, either you're in favor of freedom of speech and thus would want any attempts to suppress it out in the public domain, or you're not in favor of freedom of speech, thus giving your mentioning of my YouTube uploads in the derogatory manner that you have credence. Now, which is it? And your third assumption here is that I require the confrontation to fulfill my purpose. Actually, wrong. The ideal hugophoning session, in my eyes, hugophoning, that's the name that I give it, is where I have not been harassed by the police, where I have not been heckled, where I've given out loads of hugs and interacted with a lot of friendly and receptive people. That is a perfect result for me. That is what I would feel fulfills my purpose. Okay? On to his next point. Quote, there is another thought. It is beyond me why you feel that people would want to walk through a high street with someone with a megaphone anywhere near them, especially when you are trying to make a point about bankers or such like. Okay, end quote. Well, it's not down to me to answer that for you. Why are you asking me a question that only other people can answer? You know, I don't see why this has to be such an issue. Well, it's not down to me to answer that for you. Why are you asking me a question that only other people can answer? It's not my assertion that people want to walk through a high street while I'm there on the megaphone. People are free to do what they like. You see, that's called acknowledging people's freedom of movement, and in regards of my megaphoning, exercising freedom of expression. This is your fourth assumption about me. Just because I do it doesn't mean I consider myself to be in any position of purported authority to dictate what others should do because of my presence. You saying this does call into question whether you really do support freedom of expression, because if you do support it, then it wouldn't be beyond you. You would acknowledge that I have the freedom to speak, and they have the freedom not to listen. That isn't difficult to grasp. And as for my points about bankers and such like, you obviously haven't listened to hardly anything that I talk about. I speak far more about the mainstream media, politicians and fast food and other matters on the megaphone than I ever do about bankers. In fact, if I remember correctly, the only time when I even use the word banker on the megaphone is when I say, and I quote, "Having a politician or banker or economist sit on the news and tell us that we need growth in order to get us out of this recession is just like me being a doctor and saying to you, I'm sorry to say that you have cancer, but in order for you to recover and be cured, we're going to need your tumours to grow." End quote. So please, don't try and sit in judgment of me in thinking that you're aware of subject matter that I talk about, because it's obvious that you're not. On to his next point. Do you really believe that you're so well informed on the subjects you speak of that everyone should be listening to you? There's no difference in what you do and what the politicians you dislike so much do. You are trying to influence people that do not want to listen and to believing what you say over anyone else. End quote. Actually, no. I don't think I'm an expert on these issues, and I freely admit that on the megaphone. Something which you obviously didn't hear, thus leading you to your fifth assumption about me. I am informed to a certain degree, however, I forever acknowledge that that level of information is always going to evolve, mainly through my ongoing and relentless research into many, many subject matters, and my ever-inviting stance of people to converse with me and thus share information with me so we can all learn something, and as such I wouldn't claim the arrogant position that I'm an expert on anything besides the goings-on in my own body and mind. In fact, I regularly urge people not to take me as an authority on anything. Every 10 or 20 minutes on the megaphone I repeat the following phrase, and I quote, "Ladies and gentlemen, I urge you not to believe a single word I'm saying. Instead, I urge you to use what I'm saying as inspiration, to do your own research and arrive at your own conclusions." End quote. If there were no difference between what I do and what politicians do, then how come you never see them doing exactly what I do? When was the last time you saw David Cameron or Tony Blair or any politician standing on their own in the middle of a high street with a megaphone and a sign reading "free hugs"? Content-wise, when was the last time you heard a politician advocate independent thought and independent research to verify what they say? When was the last time you heard a politician deconstructing the inherent flaws in the current system, along with pointing out the obsolete nature of politics itself? I don't get quite where you're, getting this comparison between myself and a politician. So, with that said, how can I be of the belief that anyone should listen to me? Do you think that I'm a tyrant who wishes to enforce my conveyances on people and that they have to take it in? Tell you what, I would love to see you approach a busker who's using a PA for the microphone he's singing into and reprimand him for forcing everyone to listen to his singing. And there's also actually a blind busker who plays the accordion in Maidstone High Street. He's very, very, very talented actually. And that accordion is louder than a human speaking voice. Are you going to reprimand him for forcing others to listen to his accordion playing? On this point, do you not realise that going on about bankers is easy prey? This is his next point. Okay, well, this had me in hysterics when I first read this. If the monetary system is such a valuable and essential element of this world, then those who govern it shouldn't be easy prey. This reminds me of when people try to demonize the questioning of religion when they say, we know that religions are easy to pick apart, that doesn't mean you should. Well, I'm sorry, but claiming something as easy prey is not an adequate defense of it. It's a feeble attempt to get others to leave alone something which is obviously flawed or destructive or detrimental, and you wish to suppress the addressing of this truth. As I said earlier, I don't actually say anything about bankers themselves, because guess what? They are victims of this system just like the rest of us. They aren't to blame. It is the inherent functioning of the system itself that is to blame. I can understand the compulsion of people to jump to the straw man that those who expose the system are trying to admonish individuals, because the people who make this assumption are caught in the fallacy that they should tear down people and not the system itself, because the system itself is not a person that you can attempt to emotionally wound by throwing assumptions, insults and reprimands. And on to his next point, and when you do next go on about them, next understand that you are talking to people walking up from Fremlin's carrying loads of shopping bag, all of which would not be possible without borrowing money, including the building of Fremlin's. End quote. You're actually absolutely correct here, that due to the manner of operation of the monetary system, consumption wouldn't be possible without borrowing. However, do you acknowledge the full details and ramifications of this borrowing and consumption? That aside, how is mentioning the prior activities of people who become my audience relevant? How does it matter that they have just bought stuff from the shops in Fremlin Walk? Are you concerned that they will hear what I'm saying, realise they've wasted their money and proceed to trudge back to the shop and get a refund? Are you saying that the acquisition of goods is impossible without money? Tell you what, do you demand to pay for a book when you check it out of the library? No, I didn't think so either. On to his next point, quote, so who doesn't really want bankers? The world work of human greed, unfortunately, banks put the money in front of us. We don't have to take it. End quote. You know what? Again, you're absolutely correct. No one should have to submit to the monetary system. However, the majority of people do, thus it exists. That is why people like me do what I do, to educate people to the alternatives which can be implemented so that humanity won't be enslaved anymore. Of course, you wouldn't have heard that, because you only hear the complaints about bankers, thus causing you to feel I'm just bitching about the problems and have no solutions in mind. Of course, the monetary system is facilitated and reinforced by greed. However, greed is not an inherent attribute of the human mind. For clarification on that, please listen to my second podcast entitled Dispelling Myths about TZM, TVP and an RBE. It's the first question I answer. And on to, I think, his last point. I do truly believe in freedom of speech, but what you do is not in most minds is not freedom of speech. You are intentionally looking for either confrontation or attention. Freedom of speech is to stand there with a sign as you do and invite people to engage with if they wish to. That is people's freedom to engage, not to have someone at 100 decibels giving you their opinion. End quote. Okay, besides repeating one of your assumptions about me, which I've already addressed and dispelled, you actually contradict yourself. You say that what I do isn't freedom of speech, but then go on to define freedom of speech and admit that I qualify. Can you make up your mind, please? You are also actually claiming to have a distinction of what an exercise of freedom of expression is, and I must say I'm saddened by how restrictive it is. Tell you what, let's have a look at what our freedom of expression is really defined as per Article 10 of the Human Rights Act 1998. Quote, everyone has the right to freedom of expression. This shall include freedom to hold opinions and to receive and impart information and ideas without interference by public authority and regardless of frontiers. End quote. Not only that, but you've also claimed that the use of a megaphone